It is now my pleasure to introduce Deborah Yedlin, President and CEO of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, who will moderate a really important conversation about how we can realize Alberta's potential. I'll leave it to you, Deborah.
Thank you. And it gives me great pleasure just to briefly introduce my, my panel members. To my left, Peter Terzakian, founder and CEO of Studio Energy; Mark Parsons, the chief economist for ATB; and the newly retired, unretired CEO of Evor Technologies, Mark Fitzgerald, who's, I want to call you the switch hitter.
Sure.
You've gone from LNG to renewable energy. It's kind of like you got, so you're going to have a really unique perspective. Now, before we get started, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be able to moderate this conversation. We were talking in the green room. We have questions. I suspect we'll go off script because that's usually what happens. But I really want to start with we all listened to the Prime Minister last night. We just listened to Minister Hodgson. Curious as to your reaction from both speeches, and whether you think we're really turning a corner, and are we in a different place in terms of energy development in Canada and Alberta? Who wants to take it? Go ahead.
Well, someone's got to start.
The economist can start.
The economist can start. Look, I think all the right things are being said. I mean, like the signals are being sent that we want to build. I think he said we want to double our exports outside the U.S., which is a very ambitious goal. And we're all just kind of waiting. At least for me, I'm waiting. To be honest, I'm waiting for the federal budget. I'm looking for action on these major projects that have been announced. But so far, I mean, we can't dismiss the fact that the federal government has really changed its tone in a fairly short period of time. And I think it's sending a positive signal to investors. But I also don't think there's a ton of runway to get going. Because as we can talk about it, I actually do, I know we throw around the term crisis. I do think what we have with the level of business investment and productivity in this country is a crisis. So we actually have to do it sooner than later.
Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah, and thank you to the Alberta Securities Commission for the opportunity to speak today. I would agree with everything that Mark said. 12 or 18 months ago, I can't remember, on a panel that Deborah and I sat on back then, I was asked, what's the number one thing that Canada needs to do in order to attract investment? And my answer was, we have to change the narrative. As soon as we speak in federal government or provincial government releases about any sort of negative messaging around development in the region, whether it's because of carbon tax, whether it's because of uncertainty in the regulatory environment, it's amazing to me how quickly that moves across into briefing notes or releases around the world. And so, similar to Mark, I would take the Prime Minister and Minister Hodgson at their word. But so far, it's only their word. And I think we'll talk as we go through the panel about what's necessary to translate the language and the narrative and the words into something that investors can say, okay, it is time to move money back into Canada.
Peter?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thanks again for having me back. It's an honor to be on the stage again, and always an honor to be with you, Deborah. I really like the tone of both the Prime Minister's speech and Minister Hodgson's. I think we have turned the corner. I was on stage somewhere over the last year saying, I think this is peak dysfunction. And I think we're past the peak dysfunction, and now we have the tone change. The words are important. Ambition, the word competitiveness, competition has come up many times, even in the Minister Hodgson's comments. These are really key. And the Prime Minister brought forth again a quote that he had used when he was Bank of Canada governor, which is that something to the effect, I think, is fortune favors the bold. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really important, but in my opinion, actually, it doesn't even go far enough, that merely being bold is an insufficient condition. We have to recognize that being bold is not an option. But, and this is, in some ways, this is the way I'm sort of seeing how it's coming across is, we can do it, we need to build, and so on and so forth. But It's like if we don't do this, we are in trouble. In this world of, frankly, all-out economic warfare, which we can talk about some more. And my two colleagues here, esteemed, expressed some skepticism in their comments. And I think us as Canadians have to actually overcome that. We cannot afford to be skeptical. We have to be convicted that we can do this. Because if we don't have the conviction, particularly those of us in the room, or all of us in the room that are leaders, if we don't have the conviction, then nobody's going to come here and put their money in it. I mean, it's just like pitching a deal. If you don't believe in your company, who's going to give you money? If we don't believe ourselves in a country that we can be bold and do big things, why would anybody come and put their money here?
And they haven't for a long time.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think we got problem identification now, which is mean like, okay, we actually acknowledge we have a problem with investment and regulatory system. And I was quite taken back when I read the press release for the Major Projects Office in Calgary. I was reading it, it's like, I couldn't believe this was coming from the federal government, because there's a quote that says it's a slow, arduous process. It was basically tearing apart the federal government's own regulatory system. And I thought, okay, well, this isn't even a political issue anymore, because both major parties are saying the same thing. So if we all agree on the problem, it's time to fix it. We don't have to debate that anymore.
Yep.
Well, in all the years that I've covered energy specifically, but also politics and business, I haven't heard a prime minister talk about being an energy superpower. It's been a long time. Stephen Harper did it. And then we had a long time in the desert until Prime Minister Carney has been saying it, said it again last night. And of course, Minister Hodgson did the same thing. So we do have a sort of a focus of this panel on realizing Alberta's potential. I'm just going to start with Mark in terms of, Canada has been challenged with the pace of economic growth as, attracting investment, increasing per capita productivity. And what do we need to do for the country? And by extension, what's Alberta's role? Minister Hodgson in his remarks said, we're in the eye of the storm because of the innovation that happens in this province, the capital that we know we are attracting. And so, on the one hand, how does Alberta's economic advantage, I guess, serve solving Canada's problem?
Yeah. So I've been trying, as an economist, I've been trying to talk about the importance of productivity my whole career. And I haven't said I've given up, but I have to say it's maybe not working as well as I thought it might, because it just doesn't resonate with a lot of Canadians. They think of it as like doing more with less, or even layoffs of staff. And it just doesn't seem to sink as like, this is something we need to take charge of. And so if we reframe it to, the economy hasn't grown on a per capita basis essentially over the last decade. It's like, okay, that's a bit of an issue. I think most people would say, I don't like that. So if we talk about, like, most people can agree that we want the economy to grow. We should do that. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, we've been adding people to the economy, and that's the only reason it's been growing. And that's just not sustainable. If you look at the last decade, and actually the last 2 decades, business investment per person is below what it was 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So basically the economy's been growing through consumer spending and government spending. You say, well, how can that continue? And my answer is, it can't. We just can't. Like, the households are already highly indebted. The Bank of Canada is not going back to 0% interest rates. So there's just no conceivable way in my mind to grow the Canadian economy without bringing back private capital. It's just not possible. Well, we have an export problem too. Exports are below where they were a decade ago. But how do you get exports without investment? So I think that's basically coming back to this critical need to bring back private capital to Canada. And so Alberta is an extension of that, because we saw what happened in 15, 16, and we still are below where we were back then. And so I think, fixing the problem, the investment problem in Alberta will also go a long way to improving it here in Canada.
So when you talk about increasing exports without increasing investment, I mean, the Prime Minister says he wants to double exports.
Yeah.
So
How?
what's the variable that we have to solve for?
Well, that's a tough thing to do. I mean, if you look at how long it's taken us to double, I think it's been around 16, 18 years or something like that to get to where we are. on non-US exports. So to double in the next decade is going to be hard. So what I'm looking at are, well, we have a low starting point with energy. Like we're sending more, crude oil to Asia now. LNG Canada has started up, so that's going to get gas to that market. Sending propane to Asia. But the starting point on energy is very low. If you want to look at some low-hanging fruit to get the Carney's target, you could ramp up your exports of energy to non-US markets. So I think Carney's probably looking at some low-hanging fruit. Like this is not a problem he has to solve in the next 3 years. He has to solve it now.
The clock's ticking.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark, you had a front row seat, and you wear the slings and arrows of getting LNG Canada going. And so I think when you look at what's being announced, phase 2, it's obviously on the project list, and the challenges and what you had to face getting this cargo loaded and the industry started in Canada, so to speak.
Yeah, I had the really great privilege of being on the West Coast. My previous employment was with Petronas, and seeing the first cargo leave and touring that facility and touring the boat and participating in that celebration. And I look at that as just an incredible example of what can be accomplished with a little bit of perseverance, a little bit of resiliency, and a little bit of determination. I would share what both Peter and Mark have talked about. I spent 3 years leading our global business at Petronas, and so I've had the privilege and the pleasure of being in most of the energy-producing countries around the world, doing business in those, meeting with regulators, meeting with governments, having an understanding of how the dynamics of the world sort of exist in that energy ecosystem. And one of the things that's become very, very clear to me is in Alberta, the quality of the talent here, the quality of the rule of the regulatory systems, whether it's the Alberta Securities Exchange or Commission, whether it's the energy regulator, the quality of how we do business is second to none in the world, absolutely second to none in the world, and yet we apologize for it. And yet we say, well, we're not sure that we can really export that onto the global stage because either we're too Canadian or, we don't feel we have the license to do that. And so as the Prime Minister and Minister and otherwise start to speak about the opportunity to create that let's use the word energy. I'll now use geothermal because I switched from that one to that one, but which is we'll talk about that. That's amazing. But I think Peter's point is really well made. It's going to take each of us pausing and saying, I'm not sorry that we are a resource economy. I'm not sorry that our economic growth and our economic development and the future of the next generation is going to be centered on the development of our natural resources, aligned with the evolution of some of the technology and artificial intelligence and otherwise that will work its way in. And I share that because I say to people, I've been in areas of the globe that will supply that energy and will supply those resources and will supply that talent if we don't. Yeah. If we don't. And the commitment to human rights, sorry, Deborah, the commitment to human rights, commitment to rule of law, commitment to social progression, commitment to decarbonization is not the same. And so it's all about following through on what the Prime Minister and the Minister said and actually making it real.
I just want to follow up with that because you sat at a table where you were at a company that invested all around the world, right? And so now we have a different message coming from Ottawa. If you were sitting around that Petronas table today, what would it look like in terms of you making the argument to invest in Canada versus, let's say, 5 years ago? How would that how would that conversation change?
Yeah, and so I will share those conversations with the caveat that I don't work there anymore. So these are only personal opinions that I'm sharing. Canada has traditionally, in the major international energy players, of which we were one, and we operated with most of the majors around the world, Canada was viewed as a country that was high risk to do business in. I can't get my head around that as a Canadian. In the time that I worked for that organization, we saw between, well, I won't give you the numbers because I will get in trouble, but saw an increase in the risk premium demanded by any investment that was centered for Canada. To the point where, I've shared before in a public environment, we considered doing LNG projects and resource development projects in countries like Argentina. We announced that publicly. And if you can appreciate the fiscal regime in Argentina and the fiscal challenges, you kind of go, that risk premium is starting to come down because of the narrative. And now the next step is, okay, as we test new projects, the Project Management Office is a great example. Are we able to transition these projects through a process to create certainty, doesn't create rework, doesn't create recycle, doesn't create new requirements and new rules for doing the project or new conditions every time it goes through a different stage, which is something we're unfortunately very, very familiar with. And so we need to get a project through, we need to test, and I think the Prime Minister, I would agree, is committed to showing that we can do that, and then that risk premium drops again, and the investment will flow back into Alberta.
So meanwhile, we still have some challenges in terms of being at a very uncertain time in our history. Peter, Mark was working on a project that was on the West Coast. How concerned are you in terms of our ability to achieve some of these opportunities when there's such a lack of alignment between the provinces? And I think of the BC-Alberta dynamic as one example when we think about the importance of accessing new markets for our energy resources.
Yes, well, the answer to that question, I think, requires first just a bit of a contextual
Sure.
of how the world has changed, certainly since the election of the US administration, the Trump administration, but even before that, where we have now gone back to a paradigm of economic warfare that we have not seen in my read of history since the mercantilist era 200 years ago. And in that era, and in actually many eras of human history, economic warfare, such as tariff sanctions, battling for control of trade routes, using supply of vital commodities, such as critical minerals, as a tool of exerting economic coercion, things like that. I mean, these are all back on a weekly basis, if not more. So, given that that is the paradigm that we have to wrap our minds around, those eras also are characterized by the alignment of the state and its strategic industries. So if you go back a couple hundred years with the Dutch East India Company, the English East India Company, you see clear alignment between the corporate industrial complex and the state in achieving not only economic prosperity for the mother nation, but also geopolitical influence around the world. So if you think about any of the headlines that come at us on a daily or weekly basis, you can associate it with that kind of behavior and the acknowledgement that, okay, we are in outright economic warfare, and Canada is in a particularly sensitive position caught between China and the United States, and that we need to wake up to this reality. And waking up to the reality and acting on it means that we too have to think about how state and vital industries align, and industries that have scale, such as energy. This does not mean nationalization of our industries, but it means a close alignment between the strategic intent and the definition of return, because it's not now just financial return, it's return to the nation and its prosperity. So the alignment of state and industries, whether it's energy, agriculture, critical minerals, lumber, whatever, is paramount. So if we do the situation scan of Canada, and we say we got this federation where we have federal government, provincial governments in plural, and industries in plural, we don't have a lot of alignment. at the moment, in my opinion. Now, I think that the narratives that are coming from the Prime Minister and Minister Hodgson and others is starting to tune people into it, but we've got a long way to go in terms of understanding that corporate interests are not just profit motivation driven, that there has to be other returns to the nation, that provinces have to understand that if they don't align not only interprovincially but with the federal government in terms of pursuing interests and then thus aligning with each of the strategic industries within each of the jurisdictions, we are not going to be able to, at a minimum, defend ourselves against economic coercion, such as we have been subject to, whether it's on canola, aluminum, whatever. That's the minimum requirement, is to be able to defend ourselves, but then move up the hierarchy of ambition, which is what the Prime Minister talks about, uses that word a lot, the ambition to actually dictate economic terms such as pricing for our commodities so that we get the best prices in the marketplace. And then I would say the final and the highest rung of ambition would be this term superpower, which personally I think has been misused. I read superpower as somewhat of an aggressive term that certainly China, the United States, and other sort of jurisdictional coalitions, including OPEC and stuff like that, would fall into. I'm not sure we need to get there. Like, we're at the bottom rung, which is almost like no ambition, no alignment, and we need to go up that rung, okay? Yeah, so that's...
We need Clark Kent,
We...
maybe.
No, I actually just said we need an attitude adjustment. Like, this is, I said the words are really important. Building on what Mark number 1 here said. Mark number 2, yeah, which is 1. Depends if he's on your left or right. Okay, so, but the point about being competitive is so important.
Yeah.
Well, and so I guess
It's just, it's like we're not in that mindset.
And maybe just to add, because Mark and I were just before we started the panel, a lot of this was wrapped in climate policy and emissions, and which I think led to a layering of policies over time that became difficult to navigate. I think, we're not entirely on the same page here. Like, I think people are nodding their heads saying, we got to get the Canadian economy going, blah, blah. We got to get big.
Who's we? Who's we?
The province, the premiers, and the Prime Minister, for the most part, are saying knock down interprovincial trade barriers, like all that stuff that sounds good. Like, let's expand into overseas markets, blah, blah, blah. But there's one big thing about Canada's role in the world that I don't know if we've fully agreed on, and that is like how we treat emissions and climate. Because I think we need to think about Canada's role in global emissions. I think it's really challenging to have the conversation around hitting national targets and stuff like that when we're not accounting for the fact that if we sell LNG to China, that could displace coal. Like, if we can't agree to that, then I think you're gonna have some infighting still, because I just don't think we're quite there yet.
I think there's, the climate plan that's going to be released by the Prime Minister. I think it'll be in the budget. It'll be more sort of process driven as opposed to target driven. That was the sense that we got last night. But Mark, you and I talked about this in Vancouver. Like, carbon molecules don't have passports. There's so much more we could do here that would offset what goes on somewhere else, and we just haven't seized that moment.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
But do you agree, Mark?
Yeah,
that is it's something I keep running into.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'll try to avoid President Trump's attempt to show the vertical barriers for carbon, and otherwise, if you haven't seen his attempt to do that, go Google it. It's quite entertaining. But when I talk about like the opportunity for us as Canadians, as I think we're all reinforcing, not to be apologetic, the LNG produced in Canada is the cleanest, lowest carbon emissions, lowest carbon LNG in the world by 50%. 50%. And yet, as we talk about expanding that industry, as Mark talked about, it's like, well, no, because we'll increase emissions. Right? The exports from the west coast of Canada go to Eastern Asia, Southeastern Asia, where there's 1,400 new coal-fired facilities, the last number I looked, you may know more, that are on the books for China. 1,400. And so if we think about that, as we've talked about, right? Again, we go back to, if we're focused on decarbonization, and decarbonization as a methodology to combat climate change, which I agree with, then the best way to do it is not to restrict the best in the world at doing that and the lowest emission energy in the world. It's to take that and export it. And then what that does, and I think, Mark and Peter understand this way better than myself, as you increase the economic benefits in Canada, as you increase the revenue generation in Canada, you only increase the technological and innovation advancements that will then further support that.
Yeah, and the other thing you said, Mark, was in your earlier comments was, if we don't do it, someone else will.
Somebody else will.
And that's just a very simple thing. We all nod and say, of course, that makes sense. But do we actually internalize that and act on it? Because we're just ceding, production to other countries that aren't producing as responsible as we are. So that's never made sense to me. And maybe I can be convinced, but I haven't been so far.
So from an Alberta perspective, what is the potential for us from it, both from a conventional, unconventional, and innovation standpoint? I mean, we know that we continue to attract capital to the province. I was talking to Christina Williams, and she was giving me some of the VC numbers. We've had the 5-year growth in attracting venture capital to Alberta is 25% versus 5% across the country. So we'd actually, you can understand where we're actually playing. And Calgary's still the third most active city in the country for deals after Toronto and Montreal. Who would have thought that was something that Alberta, a place where Alberta could play? So I'm curious as to sort of, let's recognize the energy sector, and let's think about where else we play from a growth and opportunities mindset.
Well, I mean, I think what you said is very powerful, because we've never produced more oil and we've never had as much venture capital going to tech. So I've been around long enough to be like, these conversations about picking lanes, like, Alberta, what are you going to do, this or that?
Yeah.
You only have so many people. Well, we don't have a people problem right now. We got lots of people that moved to Alberta. We actually have pretty high unemployment. We got to put people to work. So we got to do both. And we got to do the high value stuff, because that's where our productivity advantage is.
Right.
And that's why we have a wage advantage over other. I looked at the Alberta's productivity advantage, and basically 80% of it is just because we have more people in industries that are highly productive.
Right.
Not that we're just, as Albertans, just way more productive than everyone else. We just do more productive things. So we need that, but then we also need to grow other sectors and I think we can in ways we couldn't in the past, because we don't have that same level of competition.
Peter and I are going to go to Mark.
Well, it's understanding actually that it's all interconnected. I mean, energy is just a foundational input into secondary and tertiary industries. And so, like, you take data centers. Data centers are semiconductor at the core devices. I mean, you're converting energy into information in electromagnetic form. I mean, it's an energy play. It's just like, it's like a light bulb. It takes natural gas to electricity to light, and most of it comes off as heat. So, ditto for these energy centers. But understanding that we have abundant and cheap energy under our feet, and by the way, we have a lot of wind and solar and coal if you wanted to, like, this is a privilege that most other countries don't have. And then layer on top of that the latitude advantage that we have in terms of being colder in the winter. Yeah. And all of a sudden you realize that, okay, there's much more here than just an export play of raw materials. Like, there's nothing to say that we can't build the next generation of manufacturing And we're ideally situated for that because we don't have legacy infrastructural, I'll call it baggage, of invested in heavy machinery. Like we can go straight to robotic manufacturing and all the tech-related jobs that go with that, and be low-cost producers, not only from an energy input, but from a manufacturing perspective. Like it's just this, it just comes back to being bold and ambitious. Like, you know, we're not in this mindset. Like, I keep coming back to that. Now we don't need Clark Kent. We need a psychologist to get us tuned up here, because we have everything that it takes that other countries don't have.
Yeah.
To have one of the best economies in the world. So what's our problem?
So, yeah.
But just back to Alberta, I mean, we are a province that has risk capital, built an energy sector, convinced foreign investors to come here and help us build it. And so shouldn't Alberta be the example of how you do have to change that mindset?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way we've got an energy sector.
Yeah, but do we have the risk? What's this 25%? Is that
It's
25% or what?
So
Like it's
the
probably
growth in venture capital over the last 5 years, as it's grown 25% in Alberta, but 5% across the country.
Yeah.
So relatively speaking, we've done more. We sort of brought up
okay.
the
Like I'm generally a battery half full guy, you know. Like, but you know, growing 25% off a very low base is still a small number. Like we need to think bigger. Right? It's
in Yiddish, the word is nothing from nothing. It's like garnished mit garnished. Anyway, but Mark, you know, I just, from a potential standpoint, sort of mark number 2 at the end, okay? Then Mark reminds me.
This one.
That one.
This one.
You know, you're now taking over the helm of EVOR, which is an innovation play. It's geothermal. It came through CDL, the Creative Destruction Labs at the university. It's kind of an example of what's possible. So that's, you know, an attracted capital. Doing a pilot project in Germany. Maybe you can tell us why that's happening. But just how do we sort of take that next generation? Because this is something from an innovative standpoint that's driving.
Thank you, Deborah. And I'll share my entire 3 days worth of in-depth knowledge on the new company in the shortest retirement in history, which my wife said is 2 times too long already. So I think as we think about the ingenuity and the institutional knowledge and the history that Alberta has and has created, you know, Ever is a great example of how that can transition at the boundaries or the seams into new technologies, new companies, new opportunities to grow a business that I believe, firmly believe, which is why I jumped so quickly, to have a global impact and bring that Canadian technology and innovation. You know, Alberta grew up learning how to develop our oil and gas resources, learning how, you know, amongst other things. And in doing so, has created opportunities in an organization such as Ever to apply that expertise and that ingenuity and that knowledge into advanced geothermal systems. And in doing so, Alberta and through Ever are leading the world again, and how you apply those advanced geothermal systems into the generation of, or to the development of heat and power systems around the world. And yeah, we're in Germany right now, really excited about that, targeting startup of our first real significant facility, you know, sometimes towards the end of the year. And, you know, I continue to hope, and this is a good example, that through the actions of the Premier and the Prime Minister, that at some point we can say, this amazing Canadian Alberta company that's staffed with people that are so much smarter than me, like it's ridiculous how smart these people are. We don't have to go overseas to build these. We don't have to go overseas to test and export. That the investment climate and the opportunities and the support are absolutely right here in our backyard. And so I'll just leave that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and I think to Peter's point about being bold and your point about like growing this in Canada is one of the things I observe in some of the data around our productivity performance is we do have really strong startups, you know, in Canada, but the scaling is in Canada is an issue, and commercialization of technology. So that's actually a big, I don't mean to say it's all investment. That's a big part of it too.
Okay. Yeah.
And getting your idea, like staying in Canada.
It really is. I mean, Mark, that's Mark 1, Mark 2.
It'd be funny if you were calling yourself Mark.
I know. I think it's it's a really good example because as Deborah talked about, the Creative Destruction Lab is something through the university that people should be really proud of in this city. I mean, the opportunities that people have, that entrepreneurs have, to be able to come in and get mentorship and support and build towards monetizing and creating and commercializing their ideas, accessing capital is amazing. But then it starts to get really hard. And when you think about those Canadian companies that truly are global leading, and then competing against those in the South that get much more significant support in terms of the advancement of the commercialization in those companies. It's again an opportunity for us to say, as Peter talked about, like, we got to be bold. We got to push the economy forward. We have to push these opportunities forward. We have to be maybe willing to take a little more risk as a sort of entrepreneurial society, and that is I think something that we're learning how, and the licenses from the Prime Minister and the Premier are there. But I think, as you've heard from all of us, we have to make it real, right? Just opening the doors.
Peter, you've been part of the Creative Destruction Labs. I'm going off script, and just talking about how you've mentored and seen those companies start, sometimes scale, sometimes fail. And when you see the Alberta sort of complement of those startups, how do you see, I mean, you've had a front row seat to see how they succeed, don't succeed. What do you think we need to do better at? And maybe is there something that happens in Alberta better than it does somewhere else? Because it is just as an advert, the Creative Destruction Lab chapter in Calgary at the Haskins School is the most successful one in the country. So we've done something right in Alberta. We've created almost $5 billion in value since it started. So let's start there. Why do you think that's been so successful? And you've watched it all.
Well, Alberta has had a long-standing entrepreneurial culture that goes back to the early 1900s. I mean, with the oil and gas industry and the start of the Alberta Stock Exchange, actually, and the risk capital and the wealth generation in our resource industries that has led to angel investors that have been willing to take greater risks than most.
Yeah.
And that culture is still here, in my opinion. And so having that front row seat in the Creative Destruction Lab for 5 years, I'm no longer there, but for the first 5 years, I saw that there's no shortage of creative entrepreneurs, no shortage of really brilliant people, a little bit of a shortage of the ability to pitch a good idea, but that's certainly surmountable, and that's one of the things that I help do. And for ventures like Ever, which, as you said, really made its mark, and CDL was backed by some of the angel investors here in town and actively mentored. So I think we have those right ingredients. I think it's the challenge has been in those second and third subsequent rounds of investment, and the lack of deep capital pools and that next level of risk taking that's been deficient. And there's been endless debates on why that is. I'm not even sure we've solved that, but we do need to solve it if we're going to create larger and larger companies. But it's the question of why we don't scale to really big companies is, I think, in that notion that we don't have the really big capital pools such as our neighbor to the south. And so, Mark, if tomorrow's a big private equity firm or some other financial institution came to Ever and say, I'm going to give you a 50% premium on your share price, sell your company lock, stock, and barrel, I imagine that the investors probably would say yes. And so we've lost a company that has the potential to be the global leader in geothermal. Right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So how do we stop that?
Well, because there's no Canadian bidding against the American.
But why not?
Well, because other than our
We do
pension
have-
plans.
With pension plans, we have the Maple 8, we have those pools of capital. How do we get them to work?
That is the million-dollar question. Honestly, we were having the conversation at lunch, and I was talking to a lot of smart people. I don't know if we've figured this one out. Because I've always thought naively that if we have the ideas, they get financed, but that's just not the case. We got lots of great ideas. We got great companies, but we just kind of get stuck at that kind of that mid stage, that growth phase. But that's a really important problem to solve because we have disproportionately number of smaller firms, and there's great small businesses, fantastic, but that's actually one of the factors why the U.S. has a productivity advantage. They scale more companies to larger phase and that are more productive.
Well, it's Small Business Week, and 98% of businesses in Canada are small businesses.
Yeah.
That means they're between 1 and 100 people.
Yeah.
And so that, to your point, that's a very different makeup of the business sector right now.
Yeah, and I mean, we're in a world where scale matters.
Right.
Scale matters.
Yeah.
If we're going to compete globally. So, double exports. The top export industries in the country are oil and gas by far, 180 billion. Mining, I don't know, it's just over 100, I think. I don't know what its exports are out of that.
Falls off very quickly.
But it falls off very quickly. Then you get down into like agriculture, which is big by anybody's measure, but I think it's sub 50.
Yeah.
And then you get into forestry, which is probably 15.
But we haven't talked about egg, and I do think
About what?
agriculture.
Oh, I thought you said eggs.
Oh, we could talk about eggs. Yeah.
So
Do you want to talk about eggs, Peter?
No.
No, I don't actually want to talk about that, but no, because I don't know enough about it. But like that underneath the surface, that industry, food manufacturing, has been a real growth area in the province. And you go to the Lethbridge area, and you have McCain potato processing plant, and you have plant-based proteins and flour milling. Like this is a really exciting industry, and it's like a classic, just like energy, playing off strengths.
Right.
And I call that diversification. Like some people might not, but I said, why wouldn't you call it that?
Yeah.
It is. But if there's two things that give me a lot of confidence in the Alberta economy going forward long term, it's one of the things Peter just said is like talent, young, skilled workforce. I mean, people didn't leave in 15, 16. There are some people that left, but for the most part, we kept our talent base. And that's been fantastic. I think it's helped grow our tech sector. And the other thing is resources. We have every resource that the world could possibly imagine or want, and we just got to get to them.
Do we have to think differently about how we de-risk what needs to be built? I think that's part of what I think the federal government's going to be looking at, and who takes that risk? What does it look like, so that we can achieve some of these goals that are, that we would like to achieve in terms of increasing export potential, of course, which needs infrastructure. It's another conversation, but who takes that risk, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's shared, Deborah. One of the things I was thinking as I was listening to Mark and Peter is we often hear that we need less regulation, we need less rules, that it's overburdensome to do business, and I don't actually agree with that. I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with the pancaking regulations of
Well, I think that we need to be proud in Alberta around the stability that exists in that structure and those regulations, right? So the Alberta Securities Commission, very, very well respected, very well regarded, and create stability and predictability in terms of how businesses conduct themselves in Alberta. The energy regulator is another good example, right? As investors, I think we've talked about a couple of things. Like for our organization, I have a very, very proud Alberta company with a global view. But as we start to try and scale, the ability to access capital, the ability to get sort of the country and the province behind it starts to diminish. It starts to diminish. And as Peter said, we can probably have debates for days and days and days about why that is. But companies that are seeking to advance will then have to shift globally. And so it's an opportunity to create a narrative around pride and excitement in terms of what exists. The other is this top-down, and you talked about it in terms of a pancake, right? As we start to consider then the fiscal environment that we're asking companies to operate in, we layer in things like a carbon tax. There's no jurisdiction in the world that is even close to us in terms of a carbon tax. All that does is decrease investment, decrease growth in the region of the world that is already the best in the world, right? Again, I struggle with that. You're decreasing investment and decreasing growth in the most decarbonized region in the world that has the biggest opportunity to make an impact. Look at some of the tax requirements that exist, right? And so when we speak about the ingenuity and the opportunity for business to grow and the ability to operate within the regulatory and the frameworks that exist, to me, yeah, I mean, we know how to do that, all of us. But it creates certainty. Right?
Mark, just on the carbon tax, because the economists are supposed to.
You knew I was going to bring it up.
Yeah,
right?
economists are supposed to talk about like carbon pricing is good and all that kind of stuff. But wasn't one of the challenges is that we had an industrial carbon price or tax, carbon tax effectively. Yeah, well, we still do, but we killed the consumer one. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, oh, we're maybe trying to convince everyone, or like economists and public policy people and even politicians, that this is the most efficient way to reduce emissions. But then we did other stuff too. Yeah. We put in the oil and gas emissions cap, we put in the clean fuel standard, like the list goes on.
Yeah.
And do you think that's where it all kind of broke down?
Yeah, I mean,
because it was kind of like, what is the best way to do this?
Yeah, and I think it's, I talked about it, right? It's a domestic focus and domestic targets versus a global view. And I do think the Prime Minister is starting to try and drive us towards a global view. I firmly believe that the previous government's perspective was we can create a model for the world of how to decarbonize an industrial, and like how to decarbonize a resource economy, how to decarbonize an economy. And so I mean, again, both of you are way smarter, so look at me stepping into what I don't know. But, I think their view was, we can set that example, and in doing so, industry will respond, they'll find a way, we'll still attract investment, people will come here because they'll want to be part of that story and part of that jurisdiction. It's exactly the opposite. Companies will continue to invest in regions that they can generate the most profit. And in doing so, if we're truly committed to decarbonization, they will start to invest in means to decarbonize the business as they move forward. And so I think the challenge here is exactly as you talked about, Mark, that good intentions try and create a model for the world of how you decarbonize a country and decarbonize an economy. All it did, it drove the economy through the floor, drove investment into other regions, and made it very, very expensive to do business here. Right?
In other words, it backfired spectacularly.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sort of building off that, Mark, number two, the comments you made earlier that your previous bosses on the other side of the world perceived Canada as a risky place, which is and that that sort of well, I live in Canada, doesn't seem risky to me, but risk can be broken into two. One is sort of like the actual measurable risk. So, for example, if you have two die, right? You just sort of dice, and you roll them. So, okay, we know it's probably. But then there's perceptual risk, which is, I think those dice are loaded. Right? So I'm not going to play that game because, or I don't think that the odds are 1 in 6 on each of them. And so now we have created a situation where the legacy perceptions and the lingering perceptions of whether or not Canada is a place where the dice are loaded, metaphorically, have to be overcome. We have to overcome that. And I keep coming back to this. The way to overcome that is we have to believe in ourselves first, to be able to convey to people that, hey, you know what, that was yesterday. New sheriff's in town. We've got a good story to tell. We've got this major projects office and a whole bunch of other things going on. Why don't you revisit, come back to the table?
But what about outside the major projects office?
Well, yeah, that's competitiveness. I'll come back to that word. It's just so important. Like whether it's our auto industry, aluminum, lumber, like the list goes on and on and on. And look at our response to the assault, the economic coercion from the United States. We're waiting for some sort of deal for the USMCA #2 to come about. And I'm thinking, hey, you know what? Like going backwards in time is yesterday's news. Like the message has got to be, okay, this is what our closest neighbor is doing to us. How are we going to compete globally and find new markets, which is what the doubling of exports. I think that's the right channel. But I don't think it's adequately explained to the people of Canada that, again, we like wake up, folks.
Yeah.
Like it's not 2024 anymore. We have to compete hard in this new world characterized by economic bullying.
Yeah. And I think it's great that we have a major projects office where we're going to fast track projects. That's fantastic. My point is that we need to be competitive outside the major projects office.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like it can't just be you're on the list and you're going to be competitive. Like we need to look at the whole thing.
But isn't there some like legacy industries,
Yes.
and I'll put autos in there for the sake of argument, like that have been around for a long time, legacy industries that are not in the major projects office stuff, right? That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like it's
Oh,
just
interesting.
like it's not just entrepreneurs and people coming up with some new AI algorithm or something. Like I'm talking about like the big established industries. There's a reluctance to acknowledge that if we don't get into a competitive mindset, we're going to get pushed around big time.
Yeah. And that means not just selling to one customer.
Absolutely. I mean, MBA 101, don't rely on one customer,
That's state
right?
101
Can
too, right?
we be an energy super? And that's been your argument, right? We can't be an energy superpower if we're selling predominantly to one customer, right?
But you know, can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, Deborah.
go
I mean, like in this concept of energy superpower, one of the things that we sometimes gloss over, and I appreciate, is certainly that's got benefits for Alberta. It's got benefits for the country in terms of economic development, economic growth, prosperity. 50% of the world's energy production comes from and will continue to grow in jurisdictions around the world that are not necessarily considered friendly to us. And as the geopolitics around the world continue to become somewhat challenging and fragmented, as our neighbor to the south embarks on a direction you may or may not agree with, again, the opportunity exists for Canadians in the country of Canada to continue to find ways to influence on the global stage in a manner that's consistent and congruent with our values and who we are as a country. Right? And the way to do that, in my opinion, is take everything that is in our strength, everything that we're good at, and I will reinforce, perhaps not apologize for it, but that ingenuity, that creativity, that opportunity, and start to influence globally. Because again, I can share with you from my time globally, there's a lot of jealousy around what Canada has. Incredible resource potential, incredible land base, significant access to fresh water, clean air, talent, technology, innovation, likely waterways that will allow shorter transmission of freight and otherwise through the north. And we have to meet that challenge. We have to meet that challenge, because building the best, lowest carbon, sort of safest environment, I worry, as with our panelists, that doesn't get us to where we need to be anymore. Doesn't create that safety and security that we need.
So, one of the things we're starting to see because of the economic coercion that is evident through tariffs and other issues, there seems to be a return of state capitalism. Mm-hmm. And so is that the route Canada has to go? Because it's not just about, productivity also means increasing rail capacity. We're going to have to build more rail to get products to market. That actually holds back some investment in this country when it comes from an agriculture perspective. So let's just think about some of the things that are not sexy, but need to be done. Mm-hmm. Have to spend money, it's not cheap. So do we have to look at something in the context of state capitalism in order to get some of these projects done that pay off over?
I think we're there. Like, I mean, if you look at Carty's industrial policy, he's putting money into these projects. We'll find out the budget how much.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, I've been raised in this trust markets and
I know Cattleman just killed the trust in markets.
Yeah, no, I just I've kind of had to evolve to the point where it's like, okay, well, I think there's going to be more role for the state. in some of these big projects, but we have to be very strategic, and we still have to be market sensitive and also look at things like ROI. Like, okay, if you're putting money in, are you going to get a higher return on a pipeline project? We talked about this, or another project where we don't have a competitive advantage. Like this is what we have to look at. What is it that we can do better than anyone else? And can we leverage that? If we can't, even with government subsidies, then we're going to be in trouble. Yeah.
Well, I think the word state capitalism needs a little bit of nuancing because state capitalism, I said it before, like it's not necessarily nationalization because that's where people's mind. This is not what we're talking about. But state capitalism does mean that's right. It's the alignment, the strategic alignment of state and vital industries to have some sense of market power in markets, either regionally or globally, and to exert geopolitical influence or geoeconomic influence or defend oneself against such, right? That's what it means. And so if you look at what is happening in the United States, all of a sudden you're starting to see a tremendous amount of alignment, that it's not just about free market and pure profitability, it's actually aligning to make America great again. Right. Like it or not, that's the narrative. And the federal government in the United States is also going steps further and, investing in Intel, doing overrides, royalty overrides, or I don't know what the structure is with NVIDIA. Like you're starting to see you're starting to see the alignment, whether it's SpaceX or all these big corporations are not just out there for profit motive, they are aligned in the interests of making the United States great. Okay, where is that narrative here in Canada? I'm not suggesting MACA or, well, maybe I am, right? Because we're at the other end of the spectrum in my interpretation, where the alignment is very weak, and that's not acceptable in this new world.
So imagine 15% of, let's say, one of the energy companies' revenues going to Ottawa for the privilege of selling oil, which is what NVIDIA is going to be doing, right? 15% of its revenue that they sell chips to China is going to the U.S. government. That would never fly here.
Well, no, it wouldn't, but we're not even there yet. Like we're trying to get our industries and provinces, federal government to be aligned in understanding that one for all for one, right? And that there is a greater return imperative here other than just return to the bottom line.
Right.
There is a return to the nation in time of crisis. Right? This is a energy security, national security. I mean, this is a great conversation over a bottle of wine, but I'm telling you, like this is, you may not like it or you may say, hey, that's not right, but I'm telling you my interpretation, this is the world and we have to either play or we're going to get run over.
Well, maybe this will come through in some of the military spending, the 5% GDP target. Like what's going to be classified as military-related spending? Critical minerals and things like that? I don't know. I don't know what counts. But this is where state capitalism comes in.
Right. Well, today there was an announcement with Boeing establishing basically an accelerator in Calgary with the help of PariScan and the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund. So this is a dual-use defense civilian application. So it's a bit like DARPA, but not really.
Well, and there was an announcement, not a Canadian one, an American one, 2 weeks ago, roughly. JP Morgan came out and said, we're investing $10 billion in projects of national interest.
Yeah.
There you go. That's alignment. Which Canadian bank is saying that? I don't know.
Maybe ATB will.
ATP.
Maybe ATB.
There's your cue. Mark 2.
Mark 2.
Over to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're counting down to the end of this conversation, which has been terrific. But I just, when you look at just standing back for a second, everything you've experienced in your careers in terms of what you've been able to be part of, witness, advise, sweat of in terms of Alberta and Canada's potential, what are you most optimistic about in the next 5 years, and what might you be most pessimistic about?
Do you want me to go? Sure.
Go first. Yeah.
So what I'm optimistic about is that we're having this conversation, we're talking about it. I have been watching kind of this happened, this kind of erosion of Canadian competitiveness and our productivity for some time. But before Trump, he shined a spotlight on it.
Yeah.
It was happening before. We're just talking about it more. So the fact that we now see it as a problem and we're working together to solve it, I think that's progress. So that's what I'm most optimistic about.
What are you worried about?
That we don't seize the moment. It's kind of a flip side of that.
So we don't seize the moment. You're not worried about the exogenous variables that are also sort of.
No, because I mean, like the thing is, like Trump's going to do what he does. Like we can't really do anything about that. We just have to be more. We have to take care of business here at home and strengthen our own economy, and that's the way to show Trump. Like there's nothing else we can really do.
Mark?
Yeah, I should have gone first because I like those two.
No, but you're Mark number 2.
But Mark number 2, so I'm second. Yeah, I don't know if I'm most grateful or most optimistic. I think what's happened south of us is probably the best thing that could have happened to Canada. Because we continued along with kind of riding the coattails. Life's easy, life's great, and kind of have been shaken awake. And I think that's going to bring out, maybe sounds nationalistic, but that's okay. It brings out the Canadian pride, the Canadian innovation, the Canadian determination. And I think that without what happened down south, I think we probably would have just continued along. And so I think, what am I most worried about? It's exactly the same as Mark talked about. We've got to go. We've got to move and change a little bit of a mindset that exists, both in terms of our policymakers, investors, banks, all of them. And Peter's example is a great one, that we're very, very risk adverse. Very risk adverse, and growing businesses, kind of taking that leap and pushing forward means that some will make it and some won't. But we have to take that. We have to take those steps for sure.
Peter?
That's what I worry about.
Yeah, I'm actually, despite how you may have interpreted my comments, I'm very optimistic. I'm really excited. I feel like even a second wind in my own career. There's just so much opportunity. And I think as Canadians, again...
An opportunity in the province, or broadly speaking across the country?
Well, certainly in the province. And I mean, I've been to every province and territory, but I can't speak specifically to their individual circumstance. Certainly as an Albertan, I can say, even we have it all. We talked about it earlier, underneath our feet, above wind, sun, all the natural resources. These are foundational, as Mark just said, it's other countries would give their eye teeth for that kind of resource and asset base, off of which not only can we provide exports and create wealth and prosperity, but also as inputs into the next generation of industries. And we didn't even talk that much about AI and, not so much AI, but what AI can do in a modern manufacturing paradigm and a new economic paradigm at large. And we are, we've got land, we've got the people, we've got all the natural resources. It just means, and now we have a new narrative and a wake-up call, much as we said. So that's what makes me excited. I think what keeps me awake is that not seizing the opportunity, but I think we're going to come around now. I think the psychology will
prevail.
Will prevail.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you to each of you for a great conversation, and please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.
Oh, Vinci Foss.
We still have 10 minutes. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so we've got questions up here. Fantastic. Prime Minister and Tim Larson say the right things. Can they get the caucus and bureaucracy to follow, i.e. reverse previous thinking in Ottawa? So...
Well, I'll speak up. I don't know, but I think, again, it's not the right question.
No.
It's can we, sorry to be repetitive, can we change our own opinions in this country, and then the caucus and everybody else will kind of follow? It's just too much finger pointing. Oh, this is and by the way, it's too much finger pointing on Trump as well. This is a global thing. Because we're so close neighbors, we hear so much about Donald Trump and what's going on in the world. But there's the whole dynamics on the other side of the world that aren't so pretty either.
Yeah.
That we need to acknowledge this stuff. That's my view.
Yeah.
Mark? Mark, need one,
Yeah.
one, two?
Go ahead, Mark.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I worry about is it's the narrative of the day, but something happens around the world, and 6 months from now, there's a different narrative that comes out of the government. And so when we talk about seizing the moment, take advantage of what's being said. I would share Peter's view. The pressure will come from the communities. Pressure will come from the electorate. Pressure will come from people speaking up in the media and otherwise, because we know politicians will follow what they believe the issues of the day are that will get them elected. And so I think it's more all of us speaking up saying, like, let's go, giddy up, let's go.
Yeah, and just real quick, I actually just don't think they have a choice. Regardless of your view on resource development, there's just no, like, the state of the Canadian economy,
This is the,
how else are you going to do it?
this second other question is about productivity, but much of our energy wealth leaves the country unprocessed. Would investing in domestic refining infrastructure be a practical way to turn our natural resource advantage into long-term productivity gains and export resilience? I'm going to tack something else on. We need to actually decrease our dependence on refining our minerals on China. China processes 90% of the world's critical minerals. You have 2 smelters working in Canada. The US has 2 smelters. How do we do, what, like that?
So I agree.
I'm curious.
And I would argue that's some of that downstream activity is actually happening in Alberta. Like you look at petrochemicals, the
Yeah.
Path to Zero project and things like that. So that is
That's on
happening.
hold though.
That is on, it is, but it's still, they're committed to it. And I think one of the challenges in Alberta is that the upstream sector put so much pressure on the labor market. We had so much going on in the oil sands that it was hard for us to do both.
But
And
that's over. Like that
that-
ended
but-
in 2014.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the advantage we have now is it's kind of freed up resources to do more of the value added stuff.
Yeah, but
Refining?
yeah, refining. So that refining for critical minerals, I totally agree. Like we need to be able to refine the ores into the metals and beyond, into finished products like magnets and things like that. That will really serve us well. In terms of oil and gas, though, certainly oil. You put refineries near the demand center. Like you don't put a bakery on a farm, right? You put the bakery where in a shopping mall or a strip where people go. The economics don't make sense refining locally and then shipping. So, but I also agree that we are too dependent on
China.
Central Canada, in Central Canada, on refining from and bringing products, finished products.
Yeah. Line 3. How will the Prime Minister square oil and gas development versus pressure internationally to not develop our resources? I'm not sure about that question.
Well, I think other countries are saying they want us to
They
develop.
want us to, yeah. I mean, I think it's how does he square oil and gas development versus internal pressure, perhaps?
Yeah, there's internal. I think that there's some education that needs to be done here because people say, well, oil consumption's going down or all sorts of other things about oil. Realize that oil is not one homogeneous commodity. I mean, there's all sorts of grades of oil from very light to very heavy, and each are used for different things. We have a lot of heavy, and now we have refineries that are being built on the other side of the world that are modern, that are able to take these molecules, hydrocarbon molecules, and like Lego, make them into all sorts of other products. And this is really important because not only do you have to think about oil in terms of its different grades and what they're used for, but not all of that heavy oil, in fact, quite a bit of it that is going to be used is not going into a combustion engine.
No.
It's going into petrochemicals and things like that. So when you think about life cycle emissions, which is the proper way to look at it, if it doesn't go into combustion, then all of a sudden the GHG paradigm actually changes.
Yeah, and I would add that let's also recognize there's very different narratives depending where you are in the world.
Right.
And so I think we would understand in some of the Western Europe economies, there's a very, very strong narrative around elimination of oil and gas usage and development. And sure, there's pressure that comes in that regard. Global energy demand is increasing at record rates. Population is increasing in regions in Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia, about 30 to 35% right now, depending on where you read it, of the world lives in abject poverty. And the number one way to move out of that is low cost energy. And I've seen those areas, I've been in those areas. And so that pressure comes from a very, very small subset of the world that's going, yes, similar to my conversation around our previous government's desire to set an example, but that's not the reality of the global.
Right.
We know where global economic growth, population growth, and energy demand is, and that will be met by the world, including with oil and natural gas and geothermal. And so, we have to remember that, that we should be leading that.
The question about how we fix the financial investment issues in Canadian companies. And how do we increase
Just
the
the
investment in R&D as a percentage of, we know that we also Canadian companies don't invest as much in R&D as a percentage of of their revenues as other companies doing.
Yeah, I think it gets into the conversation about risks and scaling. But the other thing on policy, we haven't talked about tax at all, which is funny.
No, I did have a question
But
about that.
I mean, there's some. I mean, I'm convinced by some of the arguments that our tax system doesn't do enough to grow companies. That you hit like small business thresholds, and you hit like a cliff, and you start paying higher taxes. Same with the SHRED program. That's been an issue. So, but I think that's really a question around risk and.
Okay. No. Okay. What role does military spending play, especially for the North? Well, it's for other opportunities. I think so that goes back to that Boeing announcement today, perhaps. But what are your thoughts?
I am not an expert on military spending, but I do think that if you want to maintain sovereignty over a region in your country, you have to spend money there.
Yeah.
And the military is certainly a way of doing that in the communities up there.
One thing I would say is that I'm going to Medicine Hat next week. They're leaders nationally and internationally in drone technology.
In Medicine Hat?
Medicine Hat area, unmanned vehicles. Yeah, but apparently we don't use. I've just learned that we don't use a lot. The Canadian military doesn't really use a lot of their drones. It's exported. So there's a perfect opportunity to take advantage of local tech for our military.
Sort of. Yeah, and I would just add, like I shared that I think what is ultimately going to become geopolitical pressure on Canada because of who we are and what everybody else wants. I just think that's the reality of, even President jokes about 51st state. He's not, like, nothing he says is a joke, right? And so, but we have to invest in those areas. We know we have to invest in improved healthcare and social systems, but we don't have the population to support the revenue generation through taxes, and we don't have the businesses that can be taxed further because of competitive issues. And so, the way I continue to think about it is economic growth, especially driven by some of the strengths that exist in Alberta, allow us to behave the way that we want to behave as a country. And so, changing the risk profile in terms of the investment in Canadian companies, investment in companies that are growing materially and significantly in Canada, has those incremental effects of not only national pride and global influence, but also that's how we can get, I believe, to where we need to be in terms of these spending.
There are 149 aerospace/defense-related companies in Calgary. But nobody knew that.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
That there you are. Everybody's under the radar, so to speak. Now I think I am at time, so I am going to say again a round of applause for our panel.